I think we agreed that this session is going to be about changing the world. That was a coaching we got right back there. So have a seat.
All right.
And it was fascinating just listening to the conversation starting with Ashutosh in the keynote yesterday. We talked about talent intelligence really moving from its core area where it started in TA and permeating many different parts of the organization. So today, we're going to talk about TA and some great strategies around how to do that. And we're going to take a peek at where talent intelligence is going in other parts of the organization. So I've got two great folks with me. Jackie, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about this great company called Eaton?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Jackie Morgan. I lead talent attraction for Eaton Corporation. We're about a 120-year-old industrial company, power management company, actually. And we kind of sit right in the center of all the mega trends around electrification and sustainability, digital everything. The company just celebrated 100 years on the New York Stock Exchange. So one of only 32 companies in the world that can say that. And yeah, I mean, we're moving fast and furious, down this skills-based, talent intelligence, road. So yeah.
So I know we have an official script, but I'm going to go off script just for a second. How do you, 100 years on the New York Stock Exchange, when the average lifespan is like 7 years these days, what's the secret?
Yeah, well, my CFO would tell you delivering results, right, consistently and delivering on our promises. But I would tell you it has a lot to do with the culture at the company. So we're a very people-centric organization, even though we're large, 100,000 employees. And we do what's right. We're an ethical organization, and we're always thinking about, our customers and our people and, making sure that, what we deliver is in line with our values.
One last question on Eaton. Pretty much every single house has Eaton in it, correct?
Yes, it does.
And where would I find this if I go looking for it? And why isn't the logo any bigger?
Yeah, I know. Well, we love to complain to our marketing team about that. So you can probably find an Eaton logo somewhere in your electrical box, or if you've got an electrical panel in your basement somewhere, even inside your car. And if you were, outside at an airport, walking around and looking at, some of the labels on the engine parts, you would see us as well.
Fantastic. All right, Keith. The other parts of the organization that are being permeated by talent intelligence, what do you do and what's going on at Heidrick?
Thanks for the intro. Hi, everyone. I'm Keith McCook. I work as a senior director and industrial psychologist on the H-Labs team, which is our internal research and development function, and I also support our Heidrick Navigator product. And Heidrick, as many of you may know, is an executive search talent advisory firm, but also with a digital offering that's oriented around succession planning and how to help organizations make better decisions around talent.
Sounds good. We're going to go a little deeper on that because it's absolutely fascinating what's going on. But I do want to peel the onion a little bit because you're at the beginning of your talent acquisition attraction strategy with Eightfold. Can you kind of set the stage of the problem and what it is you're trying to solve and what you hope to achieve over the next couple of years?
Yeah, absolutely. So for Eaton, it really started with these tailwinds, right, that are behind the company, pushing us forward, and the hyper growth that we've been able to experience as a result of it, and then. You couple that with this talent shortage, right, that we're all experiencing. Eaton's demand for talent is continuing to grow, because the company is growing so rapidly, and we don't even know, right, at this point, like what the skills and capabilities are in the future that we're going to need. So we needed to start to bring intelligence and insights and this thing, called AI, right, into the fold, as we try to predict, right, what we're going to need versus what we have, and then the strategies that are going to go in place in order to bridge that gap.
And any initial barriers, or did management fully on board with this idea of talent intelligence, or did they give you a glazed look when you walked in there and said, I got an idea?
Yeah. So actually, part of the core of our HR strategy has been to architect the talent of the future, right, at Eaton. So that's always been one of our I'll say our guiding light or our North Star. But how you do it and how you sell to senior, leadership, the tools and resources that you need in order to get there is, can be a challenge. So for us, we really started with the business problem. So what does not having enough talent mean to our businesses? If we can't get it fast enough, if we don't know where to go to get it, how does that slow down business results? You quantify that, and then you essentially sell it back to them, right? And that's how we got there.
And Jackie, I love what you just said there, because I had a lot of conversations over pretty much the last couple of days here, but also weeks and weeks and weeks. People ask, how do you bring skills to management and actually explain it and build the business case? And so often we find on the Bersin side that HR goes in with a cost center mentality. It's like, where can I reduce costs? Here's going to be the cost. Maybe I can pull it out over here. What we've recommended is go in and help the business understand the cost of growth. What is the impact if we do not have this? And the way you articulated that was fantastic. Any pushback at all when you took that route?
I wouldn't say pushback. It was more, probing and questions and help me understand. I mean, they're hearing about skills. They're hearing about AI. They're well read. Maybe they listen to Josh and his team.
I'm sure they do.
Yeah.
There we go.
But I think we just had to continue to have the conversation with with our leadership team, and they eventually got it. So.
Okay. We're going to come back in a few minutes to some more on the TA side, but what I'm taking away for Eaton to be on the New York Stock Exchange for 100 years, it probably has great leaders. And it's an enduring tradition of just people who understand how to run a company over time. Let's talk about leaders. What's going on with leadership, and why talent intelligence in Heidrick with leadership models?
Well, I think one of the primary things is it's really difficult to do well, right? And part of the reason that we're here is there's so much advantage around information and access to data, but there's also challenges with how to pull that all together in the right place. And that's part of the challenge that we're trying to solve for, is how do we provide more equal access to that information, get all the data in the right place, and structure it in a way that's really thoughtful about the characteristics that really differentiate success for the leaders, to equip HR to have more meaningful conversations with the organization and make the right hiring decisions or succession planning decisions in our case, getting the right people lined up for the next roles.
I'm going to go a little bit deeper, if you don't mind, because
Sure.
I am familiar with what you guys are doing, and it blows my mind. Really quick, some backstory on me. So I spent 3 years as the Chief Learning Officer for Deloitte, and leadership and succession for our partners was a critical activity, and we did it all by hand. And now let's go a little bit deeper on how you're actually doing it, because you're able to get a view into leaders that we've never been able to get before. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. And as all of you have seen over the last couple of days, there's tremendous power to the Eightfold platform in terms of being able to assess leaders for skills and the previous roles and all of the trajectory that comes along with that. And what we're doing is essentially taking that and adding on top of that a layer of additional insights. So we start the conversation with organizations around what really differentiates success. What are those critical factors? What are the key achievements and experiences? What's the strategic objective for the organization? And then how do you align all of these pieces of information to support that in terms of achievements, experiences, competencies, and then assess towards that so that you really have a much richer profile of each leader. It may fold in assessment data, experience inventories, in addition to all the insights you get from a more automated approach, and that just equips organizations to make better decisions around that.
And as you look at the data, what's really emerging? I mean, is it spectacular? Like, I never knew this person was a potential leader, and they're coming up through the skills platform, and then from the leadership side, it's like, yes, they do have the skills. What's really going on in all that?
Yeah, I think it's a both and, right? There's a number of different opportunities there. One is to confirm, organizations often have sort of a target for each individual in the company. They have an estimation of that person's potential for succession into the future. And so sometimes it's just about confirming what they already knew about the person. But I think the interesting conversations are those diamonds in the rough, those unexpected gems that they find as part of this, where they say, I didn't realize that about that person's background, or I see some capability or some potential for future success based on some of those assessment insights and that information that we're able to gather together. And that just equips them to be able to move people around in the organization and understand their future success potential from that.
No, I remember from my Deloitte days, the number one thing that we wanted to break was the friends and family. So if you were known, that's the next leadership position, right? And you're able now to open if I get this correctly, and correct me, please.
Yep.
You're able to open the aperture, and from a diversity and inclusion perspective, you're identifying candidates that normally would not have popped up on the friends and family list, which most companies end up doing.
Yeah, and you mentioned a key word there, which is data. I think that's really at the essence of this, is the more you can focus the conversation on what matters for success in the role, how do we quantify that, how do we make this about objective, verifiable information, insights about the candidate, or really rich perspective that's based on tangible information as opposed to bias or know-how or that sort of thing. You're going to have higher quality decisions because of that. So I think that's key.
Sounds good. And Jackie, can I pivot back to you? And
Sure.
we're going to go back to the original use case of kind of eightfold, which is talent acquisition. You mentioned that you're early in this process.
Yes.
And how are you thinking about rolling it out, and how is Eaton organized? And give some folks a feel for like what's going through from an implementation perspective on your side.
Yeah. So we went live with Eightfold on the TA side in 2023. So we're about 3 quarters into our time with Eightfold. And so far we've seen great results on the recruiting side. And really the next step for us is how we, kind of get after this, I'll call it kind of the talent, the talent network, right? Or like a talent marketplace. Because now we have our internal, candidates coming in and external candidates coming in, and we're, moving them through the process, and we're identifying skills, and we're creating this, kind of great, amazing amount of data, right? That tells us, what skills are getting hired for what jobs. But how do we translate that intelligence now into something that we can apply to our long-term talent strategy? So where we need to develop more skills, where we need to grow our people, where we need to retain more people. So that's kind of the next phase for us, and actually why I've been here, the last few days. I've had a chance to meet with our Eightfold team, and this is something that is very much on our radar, right? And it's our next phase.
Is there a culture of internal mobility inside of Eaton?
We're getting better at it.
Okay.
Yeah, we're getting better at it.
I love that answer. That's a great answer.
Yeah. So what I would say is, pre-pandemic, we seem to be enamored, right? And the company is changing its mix pretty significantly over the last, 10 years. But we were enamored with external talent, and we were hiring a lot of external talent, and our turnover was, pretty normal. We weren't seeing a big fallout. But what we realized as we were looking at, data, employee survey and sentiment from our employees, and then looking at where our employees were going if they left Eaton, we realized, we really need to focus on our existing, employee population, and this is where we really started to get into a focus on internal talent movement. So actually, my team in Global TA, last year, we started taking on responsibility for internal candidate care. So we are involved now with all internal applicants. We help to shepherd them through the recruiting process with their own teams, their own company, so that we can be a little more impactful at that experience and make sure that we make it easier for them to stay than go.
Well, I think you're not alone in your journey. If I pull in a couple of data points on the Bersin side and the research that we do, we took a look at a huge number, well over 1 million folks that had changed jobs, and then why did you change jobs in the first place? And for the most part, it's really not about money. It's about being able to develop and grow and have experiences, and if they don't see that opportunity inside the company, they will find it somewhere else. And in a world that we're in today where there are more jobs than people, they're in the power seat.
Yep.
And that's incredibly important. And then the second thing is, really that culture of internal mobility. Every company talks about it. We got access to another huge anonymized data set from a vendor who has 200 outsourcing relationships. And so we looked at all the internal movements and recruiting data. And every company says we love internal mobility. About 3% of the hires are actually coming from internal mobility. So 97% is still very traditional, and 3% is from internal mobility. So we're making progress.
Yeah.
We have a lot of progress to make in all of this. From a leadership perspective, as you're listening to the conversation and thinking about how organizations grow, what's the perspective on Heidrick on all this?
A couple of things I'd say there. One, a lot of what you said resonates. I think those same things apply when you get to leadership, right? A lot of this is around that idea of agency. Once we've pulled all of that information together, it's tremendously useful for the organization, but there's a huge opportunity there to share that information with the leaders that are participating in the process so that they have a sense of agency and they know what direction to go in the organization. How do I go to the next role? What are those key achievements and experiences that I need to check off the list? What expertise do I need to develop? And then by giving them more of a pathway towards that and a clear understanding of what will get them to either the next level or maybe just the next sort of lateral move, there's a lot of power in that and an opportunity to improve some of those things you talked about by having more internal mobility and having people that are more satisfied with the overall experience based on that.
And when we think about internal mobility, is it different for people that are tagged as leaders as opposed to the general population? Does it have to be more orchestrated? Is it up to them? What's kind of the best practice in all this? Let's move a little bit towards some best practices. How should we think about this?
So I mentioned on the front end, I'm an assessment psychologist, so I definitely have a bias for sharing feedback and making them a part of the process whenever possible. There's arguments to be made either way on that, but I've been a part of a lot of processes that did that well, and I'm a believer in that. So to the extent that it's possible, bring people in, be open and transparent about what the process is and what opportunities they have to move in the organization, and I think there's a lot of value there. In terms of the work that we do, that's a lot of the focus on our product is how do we ease that and just make that frictionless for the organization by automating this, pulling all these different data sources together so that HR can spend their time on the really meaningful task. And I think a lot of that comes down to contextualization and having conversations with the leaders in the organization, helping them to get started on their development plans and focus on those high-value activities. There's value there.
And really quick, how does Heidrick define leaders? Is it people with a title leader? Is someone magically putting a check mark against them? Is everybody a leader in the organization? How should we think about this?
Yeah, I think it goes across the gamut. It really depends on the situation. So that you definitely have opportunity or situations where there are thought leaders in the organization, may not actually manage people, but they're a very senior person and have a unique expertise or just a high level of expertise, as well as the more traditional model of leadership. We work with a wide variety of those, but that's kind of where we always start the conversation is what is the role? What is the role expected to be over the next few years? And how do we focus in on those success characteristics for that?
Can I ask you, I'm going to go off script again. Can I ask you a question that maybe the audience would be interested in? What are the derailers for leaders? What are like the dark spots that would pop up for a leader?
Well, as any good consultant, I think the answer is it depends.
Yep, there we go. You're hired by Deloitte. There you go. Welcome to the team.
Yeah,
So,
a wide range of factors. It can be something that's fundamental, like a general derailer for leadership capabilities, right? So just some area where they're really lacking, whether it's inability to drive results or build relationships, something that's pretty fundamental, or it could be something as simple as a missing area of experience or expertise. So it may just, some of those are easier to shore up and address than others. Others are more foundational and are going to take a long time to kind of turn the ship around.
are you being polite around hubris? You're being polite. There you go. So the ego.
That was the right answer.
There we go. Thanks. Switching back over to the TA a little bit. This whole session here is really around best practices, and you're a couple of years into this. You've got a vision for where this is going. There are a lot of folks here at the conference today that, man, I'm about to start this journey. What should I worry about? Can you just kind of go back and reflecting now on the journey that you've been on, what advice would you be giving the audience here on how to approach this and any gotchas out there to be aware of?
Okay. So, I would say ensure that you're kind of shoring up your plan with the business case, right? Starting with the business case, what are the outcomes that, implementing this new system, refreshing your workflows is going to do for the organization, and be able to track those. The cool thing about Eightfold is there's a ton of data, right? And you can create your dashboards and pull out a ton of intelligence so that you can start to really track the impact of the investment. And then I would say continue to celebrate, right, those wins and investigate where you're missing the mark. I think one of the mistakes we make is we implement these things and then we're like, we're good, But the reality is you have to stay on top of it. We implemented a role inside of the Global Talent Acquisition Organization, and it's our TA operations and program leadership. And one of the people on that team is laser focused on all of the outcomes from the system. And where we're seeing misses, we're investigating where those misses are. So I guess in summary, I would say stay focused on tracking those outcomes. Make sure your outcomes are tied to things that the business values. Celebrate those. Look for the misses, and if you see them, don't wait. Right? Get on the phone with your Eightfold folks. Get on the phone with your IT team. Make sure that you're getting after it early.
And what was the change curve for the recruiters? Were they cheering at the beginning, or were they afraid or confused, or what's happened along that journey?
Yeah. So thanks to great implementation partners that we worked with, who gave us a lot of advice early on. The change management piece was significant for not only the recruiters, but also for our HR business partners and the business leaders that we would be supporting, with the technology. So I would say the recruiters, because we started really early with them and helping them to understand why we're doing this, what the value of it's going to be, how it's going to improve their lives, the work that they're going to be able to basically not have to do anymore to focus on the higher value work. I think it was largely, it was celebrated. It was, people were looking forward to it. And then we just continued to train, communicate all throughout, our change management, process.
And did you set up organization around sharing best practices and like why, tricks of the trade from different recruit? What's going on now inside the organization is about continuing to learn there.
Yeah. So when we went live, we did we call it hypercare. So I think it went on for probably about 4 or 5 months after we went live, and it was a place for recruiters and HR business partners to come together and just like ask questions. We had all the training and everything. As we continue to get new releases from Eightfold with new enhancements, before we release them out into the wild, we spend time understanding how it's going to impact the recruiters, how it's going to impact the business. We put together training, and then we bring the recruiters together. We deliver it. We make sure they understand why we're doing it, how it's going to enhance, but we're very purposeful about that.
And maybe just one last question just on this particular piece here. How do you report out to the executives, whether it's the CHRO or the CFO or the CIO, on the success of this or lack thereof in any case? How do you talk about that to the executives?
Yeah. Any chance, any way we can, right?
Okay.
We really take advantage of everything. So, like, for example, we have Global Inclusion Council meetings that happen twice a year. So at those Global Inclusion Council meetings, it's our executive committee. I will come and sit down and I will talk about, diversity, hiring, and pipelining and retention outcomes. And, we'll talk about the impact that, our TA system and Eightfold has had on that. I was just, our board just met a couple of weeks ago. We were, sharing some results from our new EVP campaign, and a lot of what we've been able to do with the employer value proposition campaign was launched through Eightfold, right, and through the campaign capability that the tool had. So we were able to, kind of celebrate it that way. So it wasn't just a deck, an email with a whole list of, numbers. It's whenever it's important to that audience, you bring, those results forward, and, you have to be transparent about what's working and what's not.
No, and it sounds like at the very beginning you said, just tremendous results, on the recruiters and now looking to expand. We'll come back to that here in just a second.
Sure.
Going back to leadership, one of the things that Josh has published and we've talked about in this world that's post-industrial where, there's a scarcity of talent, rapid disintermediation from technology, everybody's trying to move into everybody else's industry and reinvent. Can you take us on a little longitudinal kind of history lesson of old leaders versus are there new leaders today, and are there attributes, and what does it look like, and how should we think about this?
Yeah, leadership is interesting because there are some universals, and that's where a lot of our content comes in around the capabilities and competencies that are predictive of success for leaders. And I think that's, there may be some variation over time, but you see a lot of consistency.
And a couple of universals for us.
But people have to drive results. They have to be able to adapt to change. They have to be able to build relationships. None of those things are going to go away. Respond, be resilient in the face of change and challenges is something that is becoming even more of a need over time. And so I think that those are the universals, and where a lot of the change starts to happen then is around the business results and the outcomes that we're looking at. What are the things that we need to be able to, the experiences that leaders need to develop. And as we've talked a lot about, those change from month to month and definitely from year to year. And so I think that's the real opportunity is how do we provide a really simple framework and a way for people to keep that target for success updated and relevant over time so that we can continue to evaluate that and adapt as needed and make sure we're hiring leaders or succeeding leaders that will be successful into the future, not just for the needs of today.
And maybe just one last question really around leaders and how to think about it. Do you see different types of leaders for different phases of a business. So let's say it's early growth and it's accelerating. That's a different type of leader from someone doing a turnaround to someone doing with like Boeing, doing a massive regulatory and everybody's looking at you and staring at you. Are there different type of leaders that are great for different situations?
For sure, and that's always part of the conversation is how do we dial up or dial down some of those capabilities that we measure so that we can emphasize the things that matter most for the role. We're also doing some research more holistically to look at those sort of archetypes. Are there some common patterns that emerge over time? And that's one of the great things about Navigator is the ability to ingest all of that data so we have a better understanding of that. So stay tuned for more there.
Yeah, and maybe just one last, I know I said one last question, but I'm very good at always saying one last question. 7 more times, one last question here. How about from a DEI perspective? Are you identifying a broader group of leaders, and is it helping in that conversation?
Yeah, that's what we hear back from our clients is that, again, it's taking the conversation back to objective information, focusing on what matters from a job relevant standpoint, and that focuses the conversation in the right place, which opens the door for more talent to come in and just neutralizes all of those bias factors, in addition to the information we're pulling in from Eightfold, where we look at that and we know that helps to de-bias the process overall as well.
Got it. Well, I'm going to bring us back to that enterprise talent intelligence perspective that has started with Ashutosh yesterday. Josh talked about it. In fact, if you want the white paper, it's out there on the website, and I'm sure your Eightfold contacts can get it for you. We've got about 2 minutes left, and I know it's the classic question, but you've done it. So any words of advice just to kind of close out, simple thoughts as on how do you actually get started in TA with Eightfold?
Yeah. I would say, taking it back to what I had mentioned before, I think it really starts with the business case and speaking the business language, right? Understanding, what it actually means from a results and sometimes even a dollars and cents perspective, to operating an old or an out of date, talent acquisition program and technology. So if you can start with that and quantify what the opportunity is, that's really your baseline. I would say, as you're out in the vast universe of technology partners that you're evaluating, look for the ones that really understand your pain, right, and what you're trying to solve for. That was the huge differentiator for us with Eightfold. They spoke our language. They knew what pain we were experiencing. They had a really simple way of bringing that solution and alleviating that pain. And they were great partners, right? Even before we signed the paperwork, they spent a lot of time with us. So, I would say that's really where we started. And, obviously I'd be happy to chat with anybody, share more details on our experience as we went through it.
Well, and my mega takeaway in all the success, but in HR land, and I've lived in HR land for almost 30 years of my life, we get so enamored with our language.
Yeah.
And the fact that you were talking the business language.
Very important.
Huge, huge difference. Bring us home. Why is leadership so important today? I think it's the most important thing out there because of just all the challenges we have in the transformation. Some closing thoughts on leadership.
Sure. What I'd say is it's business critical, right? The decisions that you're making around leadership are possibly the most impactful decisions that organizations will make. So it's critical to get it right. And back to something you touched on, I think that's all the more reason when you implement automation to make sure you have a steady human hand on the rudder as we're going through these things, just to make sure that things are working the way that they should. Common sense still plays a part, and I think with that in place, it just ensures you're going to get to a positive outcome from that.
And so I'll close out with great leaders. You end up on the stock exchange for 100 years with a company that endures.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it.